Hi guys! So this is the second one of my Book Grocer haul videos. So the first one was my two science book boxes that I got together. This one will be my history box that I got, and the other box that I've gotten from Book Grocer was a business box. So most of the books from the business box I've since donated to the local lending library because they were just topics that I wasn't interested in. I do still have quite a few, so I might make a shorter Book Grocer haul video of those ones that I have left. But for today, this is the history book haul. So first of all, we have Bethlehem, the biography of a town. An Entertainment for Angels, Electricity in the Enlightenment. Partition, the story of Indian independence and the creation of Pakistan in 1947. Living with a Dead Language, My Romance with Latin. And you'll notice too that there is there's a few soft covers in this one, but mostly it's hard covers and mostly it's large hard covers as well. So the fact that these bargain boxes are $100 each when most of the books, like the hardcovers for example, £16.99 for this one, $25 US for this one. So your value adds up very, very quickly. So we have The Great Soul of Siberia, In Search of the Elusive Siberian Tiger. Viceroys, The Creation of the British. Global Undergrounds, Exploring Cities Within. Now this is one of those, lots of photos, like the Earth book that I showed you in my previous video. It had lots of satellite images. This one has lots of, not satellite images, but pictures, photos. And we have the Changi Camera, a unique record of Changi and the Thai-Burma Railway. The House of the Dead, Siberian Exile Under the Tsars. White Eskimo, Knud Rasmussen's fearless journey into the heart of the Arctic. Avenue of Spires, a true story of terror, espionage, and one American family's heroic resistance in Nazi-occupied Paris. World Without End, Spain, Philip II, and the First Global Empire. The Moral Arc, how science and reason led humanity toward truth, justice, and freedom. The Flight, Charles Lindbergh's daring and immortal 1927 transatlantic crossing. Strange Gods, a secular history of conversion. The Sultan and the Queen, the untold story of Elizabeth and Islam. The Last Man in Russia, the struggle to save a dying nation. The Book That Changed America, how Darwin's theory of evolution ignited a nation. And lastly, The Great Leader and the Fighter Pilot, the true story of the tyrant who created North Korea and the young lieutenant who stole his way to freedom. Okay, so we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 books came in that box. Predominantly hard covers. So, as I said in my previous video, with the amount that the number of books that you get in the bargain boxes makes it well and truly worth the $100 that you pay for them several times over. Because for example, this Moral Arc book, you can see how thick it is, and it is $32. I think that would be American, but still. And then you've got another big one, Strange Gods. It is $30 US. So that's only 2 out of the 19 books so far, and you've already got $60 of value there. So it adds up very, very quickly. Okay, so I'm going to do what I did in my last video. I'm going to read you a synopsis of each book, and I'll have the book up on the screen beside me, so that if it interests you, you can search for the book title and find it for yourself. All of these titles, as far as I know, are still available on the Book Grocer. So we'll start with Hugh Thomas's World Without End, Spain, Philip II and the First Global Empire. The legacy of Imperial Spain was shaped by many hands, but the dramatic human story of the extraordinary projection of Spanish might in the second half of the 16th century have never been fully told until now. In World Without End, Hugh Thomas chronicles the lives, loves, conflicts and conquests of the complex men and women who carved up the Americas for the glory of Spain. Chief among them is the towering figure of King Philip II, the cultivated Spanish monarch whom a contemporary once called the arbiter of the world. Cheerful and pious, he inherited vast authority from his father, Emperor Charles V, but nevertheless felt himself unworthy to wield it. His 42-year reign changed the face of the globe forever. Alongside Philip, we find the entitled descendants of New Spain's original explorers, men who, like their king, came into possession of land they never conquered and wielded supremacy they never sought. Here too are the Roman Catholic religious leaders of the Americas, whose internecine struggles? I'm not sure what that word is, I'm sorry. Whose internecine struggles created possibilities that the emerging Jesuit order was well positioned to fill. With the sublime stories of arms and armadas, kings and conquistadors, come tales of the ridiculous. The opulent parties of New Spain's wealthy hedonists and the unexpected movement to encourage Philip II to conquer China. Finally, Hugh Thomas unearths the first indictments of Imperial Spain's labour rights abuses in the Americas and the early attempts by its more enlightened rulers and planters to address them. Written in the brisk, flowing narrative style that has come to define Hugh Thomas's work, the final volume of this acclaimed trilogy stands alone as a history of an empire making the transition from conquest to inheritance, a history that Thomas reveals through the fascinating lives of the people who made it. Okay, so I didn't realise that this one was actually the third in a trilogy. I don't know if it actually mentions that on the cover anywhere. Probably have to. It does list Hugh Thomas's other books, but it doesn't mention that they're a trilogy at all. That's alright. I'm fairly certain that it would probably stand alone anyway, without having read the other two books that's supposedly part of the trilogy. So, The Book That Changed America, How Darwin's Theory of Evolution Ignited a Nation by Randall Fuller. In 1860, Charles Darwin's just published On the Origin of Species was eagerly read and discussed by 5 extraordinary American intellectuals. The book first came into the hands of Harvard botanist Asa Gray, who soon led the fight for the theory in America. Gray passed his copy to the child welfare reformer Charles Loring Brace, who then introduced the book at a dinner party in Concord, Massachusetts, to 3 other friends: the abolitionist Franklin Sanborn, the philosopher Bronson Alcott, and Henry David Thoreau. In telling their story, Randall Fuller provides a compelling biography of perhaps the single most important idea of the 19th century, revealing a unique moment when Darwin's book reshaped American notions about nature, religion, science, and race. The Book That Changed America brings to life these 5 thinkers, as well as notable writers such as Emerson, Louisa May Alcott, and Frederick Douglass, as they intersected to grapple with evolutionary theory. For some, Origen's insistence that all creatures, including humans, were related helped provide scientific credibility to the cause of abolition. For others, Darwin's depiction of constant struggle and endless competition described America on the brink of civil war. Gray and Alcott both had tremendous difficulty aligning the new theory with their religious convictions and their faith in a higher power, while Thoreau, the most profoundly affected of all, absorbed Darwin's views into his mysterious final work on species migration and the interconnectedness of all living things. Creating a rich tableau of 19th century American intellectual culture, The Book That Changed America is also an account of issues and concerns that are still very much with us today, including racism and the enduring conflict between science and religion. The Sultan and the Queen, The Untold Story of Elizabeth and Islam, by Jerry Broughton. Long before the Barbary pirates challenged Thomas Jefferson, English merchants travelled to Marrakesh to trade gunpowder for sugar. Islam and the West crossed paths much earlier than we think, and originally the Muslims had the upper hand. When Queen Elizabeth was excommunicated by the Pope in 1570, she found herself in an awkward predicament. England had always depended on trade. Now its key markets were closed to her Protestant merchants, while the staunchly Catholic King of Spain vowed to take her throne. In a bold decision, she set her sights on the east. She sent an emissary to the Shah of Iran, wooed the King of Morocco, and entered into an unprecedented alliance with the powerful Ottoman Sultan, Murad III. This marked the beginning of an extraordinary alignment with Muslim powers and of economic and political exchanges with the Islamic world of a depth not again experienced until the modern age. By the late 1580s, thousands of English merchants, diplomats, sailors, and privateers were plying their trade from Morocco to Persia. To finance these expeditions, they created the first English joint stock company, a revolutionary new business model that balanced risk and reward. Londoners were gripped with a passion for the Orient. Elizabeth became hooked on sugar as new words like candy, turquoise, and tulip entered the English language. Marlowe offered up Tamburlaine, and Shakespeare wrote Othello 6 months after the first Moroccan ambassador's visit. In this groundbreaking book, Jerry Broughton reveals that Elizabethan England's relationship with the Muslim world was far more amicable and far more extensive than we've ever appreciated, as he tells the riveting story of the traders and adventurers who first went east to seek their fortunes. The Flight, Charles Lindbergh's daring and immortal 1927 transatlantic crossing, by Dan Hampton. On the rainy morning of May 20th, 1927, a little-known American pilot named Charles A. Lindbergh climbed into his single-engine monoplane, the Spirit of St. Louis, and prepared to take off from a small airfield on Long Island, New York. Despite his inexperience, the 25-year-old Lindbergh had never before flown over open water. He was determined to win the $25,000 Orteig Prize, promised since 1919 to the first pilot to fly non-stop between New York and Paris. A terrifying adventure that had already claimed 6 men's lives. Ahead of him lay a 3,600-mile solo journey across the vast North Atlantic and into the unknown. His survival rested on his skill, courage, and an unassuming little aircraft with no front window. Only 500 people showed up to see him off. 33.5 hours later, a crowd of more than 100,000 mobbed the Spirit as the audacious young American touched down in Paris, having achieved the seemingly impossible. Overnight, as he navigated by the stars through storms across the featureless ocean, news of his attempt had circled the globe, making him an international celebrity by the time he reached Europe. He returned to the US a national hero, fated with ticker tape parades that drew millions, bestowed every possible award from the Medal of Honor to Time's Man of the Year, the first to be named so, commemorated on a US postage stamp within months, and celebrated as the embodiment of the 20th century and America's place in it. Acclaimed aviation historian Dan Hampton's The Flight is a long overdue flyer's eye narrative of Lindbergh's legendary journey. A decorated fighter pilot who flew more than 150 combat missions in an F-16 and made numerous transatlantic crossings, Hampton draws on his unique perspective to bring alive the danger, uncertainty, and heroic accomplishment of Lindbergh's crossing. Hampton's deeply researched telling also incorporates a trove of primary sources, including Lindbergh's own personal diary and writings, as well as family letters and untapped aviation archives that fill out this legendary story as never before. The Great Soul of Siberia, in Search of the Elusive Siberian Tiger, by Soo-Young Park. There are 5 races of tiger on our planet, and all but one live in tropical regions. The Siberian tiger, Panthera tigris altaica, is the exception. Mysterious and elusive, and with only 350 remaining in the wild, the Siberian tiger remains a complete enigma. One man has set out to change this. Soo-Young Park has spent 20 years tracking and observing these elusive tigers. Each year he spends 6 months braving sub-zero temperatures, buried in grave-like underground bunkers, fearlessly immersing himself in the lives of Siberian tigers. As he watches the brutal day-to-day struggle to survive the harsh landscape, threatened by poachers and the disappearance of the pristine habitat, Park becomes emotionally and spiritually attached to these beautiful and deadly predators. No one has ever been this close, as he comes face to face with one tiger, Bloody Mary. Her fierce determination to protect her cubs nearly results in his own bloody demise. Poignant, poetic, and fiercely compassionate, The Great Soul of Siberia is the incredible story of Park's unique obsession with these compelling creatures on the very brink of extinction, and his dangerous quest to seek them out to observe and study them. Eloquently told in Park's distinctive voice, it is a personal account of one of the most extraordinary wildlife studies ever undertaken. An Entertainment for Angels, Electricity in the Enlightenment by Patricia Farah. Lectures on electricity attracted huge audiences to marvel at sparkling fountains, flaming drinks, and electrified boys. Optimists predicted that this newfound power of nature would cure illnesses, improve crop production, even bring the dead back to life. Benjamin Franklin, one of America's founding fathers, celebrated for drawing lightning down from the sky with a kite, developed the 18th century's most successful explanation of this mysterious phenomenon. Prize-winning author Patricia Farah reveals how natural philosophers used these stunning electrical performances as dramatic evidence of their special powers. They had demonstrated that they could control the natural world, and now they sought authority over society. The Moral Arc: How Science and Reason Led Humanity Toward Truth, Justice, and Freedom by Michael Shermer. We are living in the most moral period of our species' history. Ever since the Age of Reason and the Enlightenment, thinkers consciously applied the methods of science to solve social and moral problems. The experimental methods and analytical reasoning of science helped create the modern world of liberal democracies, civil rights and civil liberties, equal justice under the law, open political and economic borders, free minds and free markets. More people in more places have greater rights, freedoms, liberties, literacy, education and prosperity, the likes of which no human society in history has ever enjoyed. In this provocative and compelling book, which includes brief histories of freedom rights, women's rights, gay rights, and animal rights, along with considerations of the nature of evil and moral regress, Shermer explains how abstract reasoning, rationality, empiricism, skepticism, scientific ways of thinking have profoundly changed the way we perceive morality and indeed move us ever closer to a more just world. Living with a Dead Language: My Romance with Latin by Ann Patty. After 35 years as a book editor in New York City, Ann Patty stopped working and moved to the country. Bored, aimless, and lost in the woods, she hoped to challenge her restless, word-loving brain through a serious study of Latin at local colleges. Living with a Dead Language is her entertaining exploration of the richness and relevance of the Latin language and literature. As she begins to make sense of Latin grammar and syntax, her studies open unexpected windows into her own life. The Lausch poetry of Catullus calls up her early days in 1970s New York. Lucretius elucidates her attraction to Buddhism, while Ovid's verse conjures a delightful dimension to the flora and fauna that surround her. Women in Roman history give her new understanding and empathy for her tragic, long-deceased mother. And finally, Virgil reconciles her to her new life as a rustic scholar, writer, and teacher. Along the way, she meets an impassioned group of professors, students, and classicists outside of academia who keep Latin very much alive. Written with humour, heart, and an infectious enthusiasm for words, Patty's book is an object lesson in how learning and literature can transform the past and lead to an unexpected future. The Great Leader and the Fighter Pilot: The True Story of the Tyrant Who Created North Korea and the Young Lieutenant Who Stole His Way to Freedom by Blaine Harden. Blaine Harden, the best-selling author of Escape from Camp 14, tells the riveting story of how Kim Il-sung grabbed power in North Korea and plunged the country into war against the United States, while the youngest fighter pilot in his Air Force was playing a high-risk game of deception and escape. As Kim ascended from Soviet puppet to godlike ruler, No Kum Sok pretended to love his great leader. That is, until he swiped a Soviet MiG-15 fighter jet and delivered it to the Americans, not knowing they were offering a $100,000 bounty for the warplane, the equivalent of nearly $1 million today. The theft, just weeks after the Korean War ended in July 1953, electrified the world and incited Kim's bloody vengeance. During the Korean War, the United States carpet-bombed the North, killing hundreds of thousands of civilians and, as Harden reveals, giving the Kim dynasty the fact-based narrative it would use to this day to sell paranoia and hatred of Americans. The devastation helped Kim in part to hide his wartime blunders behind an outsized cult of personality and Stalinist politics, killing his rivals and centralizing power while rewriting history with himself as the savior of the Korean people, an outrageous tale that continues to be taught across North Korea. Drawing on documents from Chinese and Russian archives about the role of Mao and Stalin in Kim's shadowy rise, as well as never before released US intelligence and interrogation files, Harden gives us a heart-pounding adventure and an entirely new way to understand the world's longest-lasting totalitarian state. Bethlehem: Biography of a Town by Nicholas Blinko. Bethlehem is so suffused with history and myth that it feels like an unreal city, even to the people who call it home. For many, Bethlehem remains the little town at the edge of the desert described in biblical accounts. Today, the city is hemmed in by a wall and surrounded by 41 Israeli settlements and hostile settlers and soldiers. Nicholas Blinko tells the town's history through the visceral experience of living there, taking readers through its stone streets and desert wadis, its monasteries, aqueducts and orchards to show the city from every angle and era. His portrait of Bethlehem sheds light on one of the world's most intractable political problems, and he maintains that if the long thread winding back to the city's ancient past is severed, the chances of an end to the Palestine-Israel conflict will be lost with it. Avenue of Spires, a true story of terror, espionage, and one American family's heroic resistance in Nazi-occupied Paris, by Alex Kershaw. The leafy exclusive Avenue Foch, from Paris's hotbed of daring spies, murderous secret police, amoral informers, and Vichy collaborators. So when the couple at number 11, American physician Sumner Jackson and his Swiss-born wife Toquette, joined the French resistance, they knew the stakes were extraordinarily high. They would be risking not only their lives, but also that of their only child, 12-year-old Philip. There was no more dangerous place in all of occupied Europe than their street. Die-hard Nazis had commandeered almost every building. At number 31 was the mad sadist Theodore Dannecker, charged with deporting French Jews to concentration camps, and number 72 housed the Parisian headquarters of the Gestapo, run by the most effective spy hunter in the Third Reich. As their Nazi neighbours rounded up French Jews and ruthlessly destroyed all opposition to German rule, the Jacksons stepped up their own private war against Hitler. From his office at the American hospital, Sumner smuggled fallen Allied crewmen safely out of France, and Toquette agreed to allow the Gaulet network of the resistance to use the family's home as a drop box for vital information en route to Britain. Meanwhile, just yards away, the screams of captured resistance members drifted down the street from the open windows at number 84, where Allied spies were also tortured. As D-Day neared, the noose began to tighten for the Jacksons as well. When the family's secret was finally discovered, they were forced to undertake a journey into the black heart of the war-torn continent from which there was little chance of return. Drawing upon a wealth of primary source material and extensive interviews with Philip Jackson, Alex Kershaw recreates the City of Light during its darkest days, dazzling readers with the vivid immediacy of the best spy thrillers. Awash with the tense atmosphere of World War II's Europe, Avenue of Spies introduces us to a brave family who risked everything to defy Hitler. The Last Man in Russia, The Struggle to Save a Dying Nation, by Oliver Bullock. Russia is dying from within. Oligarchs and oil barons may still dominate international news coverage, but their prosperity makes a deep-rooted demographic tragedy. Faced with staggering population decline and near certain economic collapse, driven by toxic levels of alcohol abuse, Russia is also battling a deeper sickness, a spiritual one born out of the country's long totalitarian experiment. In The Last Man in Russia, award-winning journalist Oliver Bullock uses the tale of a lone priest to give life to this national crisis. Father Dmitry Dudko, a dissident Orthodox Christian, was thrown into a Stalinist labor camp for writing poetry. Undaunted, on his release in the mid-50s, he began to preach to congregations across Russia with little concern for his own safety. At a time when the Soviet government denied its subjects the prospect of advancement and turned friend against friend and brother against brother, Dudko urged his followers to cling to hope. He maintained a circle of sacred trust at the heart of one of history's most deceitful systems, but as Bullock reveals, this courageous group of believers was eventually shattered by a terrible act of betrayal, one that exposes the full extent of the communist tragedy. Still, Dudko's dream endures. Although most Russians have forgotten the man himself, the embers of hope that survived the darkness are once more beginning to burn. Leading readers from a churchyard in Moscow to the snow-blanketed ghost towns of rural Russia, and from the forgotten graves of Stalin's victims to a rock festival in an old gulag camp, The Last Man in Russia is at once a travelogue, a sociological study, a biography, and a cri de coeur for a dying nation, one that Bullock shows might yet be saved. Partition. The Story of Indian Independence and the Creation of Pakistan in 1947, by Barney White Spunner. Between January and August 1947, the conflicting political, religious and social tensions in India culminated in independence from Britain and the creation of Pakistan. From September to December, the euphoria surrounding the dream of independence dissipated into shame and incrimination. Nearly 1 million people died and countless more lost their homes and livelihoods as partition was realised. The roots of much of the violence in the region today and worldwide are in the decisions taken that year. Not only were those decisions controversial, but the people who made them were to become some of the most enduring characters of the 20th century. Gandhi and Nehru enjoyed almost saint-like status in India and still do, while Jinnah is lionised in Pakistan. The British caste, from Churchill to Attlee and Mountbatten, find their contribution praised and damned in equal measure. Yet it is not only the national players whose stories fascinate. Many of those ordinary people who witnessed the events of that year are still alive, illustrating the story of 1947 with their experiences. What independence and partition meant to the farmers of the Punjab, those living in Lahore and Calcutta, or the soldiers in a divided and largely passive army, partition will bring to life this terrible era for the Indian subcontinent. Strange Gods, A Secular History of Conversion by Susan Jacoby. In a groundbreaking historical work that addresses religious conversion in the West from an uncompromisingly secular perspective, Susan Jacoby challenges the conventional narrative of conversion as a purely spiritual journey. From the transformation on the road to Damascus of the Jew Saul into the Christian evangelist Paul, to a 21st century religious marketplace in which half of Americans have changed faiths at least once, nothing has been more important in the struggle for reason than the right to believe in the God of one's choice or to reject belief in God altogether. Focusing on the long tense convergence of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, each claiming possession of absolute truth, Jacoby examines conversions within a social and economic framework that includes theocratic coercion, unto torture and death, and the more friendly persuasion of political advantage, economic opportunism and interreligious marriage, moving through time, continents, and cultures, the triumph of Christianity over paganism in late antiquity, the Spanish Inquisition, John Calvin's dour theocracy, southern plantations where African slaves had to accept their master's religion. The narrative is punctuated by portraits of individual converts embodying the sacred and profane. The cast includes Augustine of Hippo, John Donne, the German Jew Edith Stein, whose conversion to Catholicism did not save her from Auschwitz, boxing champion Muhammad Ali, and former President George W. Bush. The story also encompasses conversions to rigid secular ideologies, notably Stalinist communism, with their own truth claims. The Changi Camera, a unique record of Changi and the Thai-Burma Railway by Tim Bowden. In the Changi Camera, acclaimed author Tim Bowden presents the unique story of one Australian soldier's experience of the fall of Singapore, captivity in Changi, and enduring the hell of the Thai-Burma Railway. George Aspinall was a keen photographer and, even in the very worst of conditions, he managed to take photos, process them, and so preserve for later generations the reality of incarceration. Along with George's own memories of those years, Tim Bowden has written a gripping and authoritative overview of what happened in Changi and on the railway. This powerful narrative and very special collection of almost 100 photographs combine to give us a raw and graphic account of just what George and thousands of his fellow Australians endured. Viceroys, The Creation of the British by Christopher Lee. Between 1858 and 1947, 20 British men ruled millions of some of the most remarkable people of the 19th and 20th centuries. From the Indian Mutiny to the cruel religious partition of India and the newly formed Pakistan, the Viceroy had absolute power, more than the monarch who had sent him. Selected from that exclusive class of English, Scottish and Irish breeding, the aristocracy, the Viceroys were plumed, rode elephants and shot tigers. Even their wives stood when they entered the room. Nevertheless, many of them gave everything for India. Viceroys is the tale of the British Raj, the last fling of British aristocracy. It is the supreme view of the British in India, portraying the sort of people who went out and the sort of people they were on their return. It is also the story of how modern British identity was established, and in part the answer to how it was that such a small offshore European island people believed themselves to have the right to sit at the highest institutional tables and judge what was right and unacceptable in other nations and institutions. The House of the Dead, Siberian Exile under the Tsars, by Daniel Beer. It was known as the vast prison without a roof. From the beginning of the 19th century until the Russian Revolution, the Tsars exiled more than 1 million prisoners and their families beyond the Ural Mountains to Siberia. Daniel Beer illuminates both the brutal realities of this inhuman system and the tragic and inspiring fates of those who endured it. Here are the vividly told stories of petty criminals and mass murderers, bookish radicals and violent terrorists, fugitives and bounty hunters, and the innocent women and children who followed their husbands and fathers into exile. Siberia was intended to serve not only as a dumping ground for criminals, but also as a colony. Just as exile would purge Russia of its villains, so too would it purge villains of their vices. In theory, Russia's most unruly criminals would be transformed into hardy frontiersmen and settlers. But in reality, the system peopled Siberia with an army of destitute and desperate vagabonds who visited a plague of crime on the indigenous population. Even the aim of securing law and order in the rest of the empire met with disaster, expecting Siberia also to provide the ultimate quarantine against rebellion. The Tsars condemned generations of Republicans, nationalists and socialists to oblivion thousands of kilometres from Moscow. Over the 19th century, however, these political exiles transformed Siberia's mines, settlements and penal forts into a virtual laboratory of revolution. Exile became the defining experience for the men and women who would one day rule the Soviet Union. Beer has unearthed a treasure trove of new archival evidence in this masterly original work, telling the epic story of Russia's struggle to govern its prison territory and Siberia's own decisive influence on the political forces of the modern world. The House of the Dead brings to light a dark and gripping reality of mythic proportions. Global Undergrounds, Exploring Cities Within. There's a very long Czechoslovakian name. Paul Dobrashik, I think. Carlos Lopez Galvez and Bradley Garrett. Over the last 2 centuries, the world's cities have undergone dramatic vertical, above-ground transformations, but at the same time they have sunk themselves into the ground, in the form of sprawling tendons of tunnels, caverns and bunkers, conduits for transport, utilities and communication, or spaces of shelter and storage. Global Undergrounds charts the reach of urban underground spaces, collecting 80 stories of subterranean sites around the world to reveal the profound but often unseen ways they have changed our lives. Illustrated with breathtaking photographs, this book exposes the remarkable diversity of man-made underground environments, from their astonishing range of architectural approaches to the many cultural meanings they carry, whether as places of hope, fear, memory, labour or political resistance. Undergrounds are places that can tell a city's oldest stories or foresee its most distant futures. They are places ultimately of both incredible depth and breadth, serving city dwellers not just with the logistics of day-to-day life, but as crucial parts of a city's mythology. White Eskimo, Knud Rasmussen's Fearless Journey into the Heart of the Arctic by Stephen R. Bown. Knud Rasmussen stands among those famous for revealing hitherto impenetrable worlds. T.E. Lawrence and Wilfred Thesiger in the Middle East, Richard Burton in Africa. Part Danish and part Greenlandic, Rasmussen is renowned not only for his bravery, joyous sense of adventure, and beautiful writing, but also for his priceless collection and interpretation of Inuit songs, stories, and mythology. As comfortable in bearskin pants under the Northern Lights as in a tuxedo at the theatre in Copenhagen, Rasmussen undertook some of the most astounding feats of endurance in the annals of polar exploration. He travelled without the elaborate preparations and large teams employed by other explorers, surviving with only a few Inuit assistants and living off the land. Rasmussen's crowning achievement, made famous as the Fifth Thule Expedition, was a 3-year, 20,000-mile odyssey by dog sled from Greenland to Alaska to reveal the common origins of all circumpolar peoples. Lovers of extreme adventure, remote cultures and timeless legend will relish this gripping biography by the writer who has been called Canada's Simon Winchester. Now, if you haven't read any of Simon Winchester's books, I highly recommend that you find them because they are worth a read. I used to own 2 of them. I only own 1 of them now. The one that I have has been made into a movie with Mel Gibson. And it is The Surgeon of Crowthorne, or it was originally titled The Surgeon of Crowthorne. I think it's been renamed now. And the other one that I used to own was The Day the World Exploded, and it's about Krakatoa. But he has many, many other books on fascinating topics. So definitely give him a look if you haven't heard of him before. Anyway, that is all the books from the history book box. I hope you found some amongst these that piqued your interest. I will have a link to the Book Grocer's website in the description below, so you can jump on their site and have a look for yourself. But as I said, if any of these took your interest, you can just type the titles into the Book Grocer site and they should pop up, because I'm pretty sure that they're all still available. Anyway, I'll see you for the next video. Thanks. Bye.